Okay, so for this deep dive, you've sent us something pretty massive. It's David S. Lifton's Best Evidence: Disguise and Deception in the Assassination of John F. Kennedy. We've got some excerpts here, and what we really want to do today is unpack the core arguments that Lifton's making in this book and the evidence that he uses, especially when he's looking at the possibility that President Kennedy's body was altered and some of the inconsistencies he finds when he's digging into those official Warren Commission findings. You know, we're not here to debate any kind of political interpretations or anything like that. We're just here to try to understand the information that's in these sources.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, it's important to remember, I mean, the sheer scale of what Lifton took on here. I mean, it wasn't just some, quick read or anything. This book represents 8 years of his life, from 1966 to 1974. He was helped by a bunch of people, folks like Bernard Kenton, Patricia Lambert, and Paul Hutch. And those folks were really instrumental in helping him go through all these massive records from the Warren Commission. I mean, he was dedicated to getting to the bottom of this.
Yeah.
And I think that's something important to keep in mind as we kind of delve into this.
So let's unpack it.
Okay.
Let's start with something that kind of grabbed Lifton's attention, which is the backward head snap. You see in the Zapruder film. And Lifton talks about actually being shown evidence that really, strongly suggests a frontal shot based on the Zapruder film.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is, Lifton's approaching this, with a healthy dose of skepticism, right?
Sure.
He's not just taking someone's word for this. He actually goes back to volume 18 of the Warren Commission records. And he's looking at frames 313 through 323. And what he does is he uses the edge of the limousine's rear seat as a kind of fixed reference point.
Okay.
Right? So that he can actually measure the movement of President Kennedy's head, from frame to frame.
Okay.
And what he sees is, and he confirms this himself, that over that, half a second or so, the president's head is moving backward toward the rear seat.
Yeah.
And again, this is something he directly observed.
Right.
It wasn't just being told to him. And that finding is significant because it really, starts to contradict this idea of a shot solely from behind.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, if a shot's coming from behind, you wouldn't expect the head to go backwards.
Right. Well, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because Lifton and others discovered that in the published volumes of the Warren Commission, the two frames that immediately follow frame 313 were actually reversed.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, imagine trying to analyze that footage if you don't know that those frames are out of order.
Right.
It really raises some questions about the accuracy of the published record itself.
Right.
How reliable is this? And it doesn't stop there. So J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, he acknowledges this reversal, but he calls it, just a simple printing error in a letter to Lifton. But again, how does a printing error like that significant, affecting those particular frames, how does that happen?
Yeah, it's a huge error. And then, there's this strange thing with Life magazine. So in the October 2nd, 1964 issue, Life magazine ran, a selection of Zapruder frames, and they included frame 323, which, it pretty clearly shows Kennedy's head touching that rear seat. But the caption that went with the photo actually describes his head as snapping to one side.
Yeah, and what's so bizarre about that is that there was a second version of that exact same issue of Life magazine.
Wow.
That corrected the caption. So, it seems like somebody knew that there was a discrepancy there, and tried to alter the narrative in some way, even in a seemingly small detail like that.
Right.
So, we're starting to see a pattern here of discrepancies in the visual record.
Right.
And potentially some efforts to kind of change what people are seeing.
Right. Okay, so let's move beyond the film itself, and talk about some of the eyewitness accounts suggesting that that some shots came from the grassy knoll. This is obviously a cornerstone, I think, for a lot of people who question the lone gunman theory.
Yeah, absolutely. Lifton, he highlights several witness testimonies that contrast pretty sharply with the Warren Commission's, conclusion that it was Oswald acting alone from the Texas School Book Depository.
Right.
So, for instance, a witness named Simmons, he reported seeing what he thought were exhaust fumes or smoke near the embankment, near that area.
Right.
Another witness, Johnson, he said he saw some white smoke right near the pavilion in that same area. And so, what Lifton takes away from these accounts is that, there's eyewitness evidence suggesting, a second firing location.
Right.
And that obviously is very significant.
And it wasn't just bystanders. I mean, there were even employees within the Texas School Book Depository itself.
Mm-hmm.
People like, Billy Lovelady, Steve Wilson, Victoria Adams, and Mrs. Alvin Hobson, who didn't believe that the shots originated from the 6th floor sniper's nest.
Mm.
These are people that actually worked in the building.
Yeah, that's right. They had a firsthand perspective on where those shots might have come from, and what they're saying directly contradicts the official conclusion.
Yeah.
So that's significant. Lifton's point here is that, these insider accounts really cast doubt on the Warren Commission's central finding, which is that Oswald was on the 6th floor and he fired all the shots.
Yeah.
That's what their whole case rests on.
Right.
And here are all these people saying that that's just not possible. It didn't come from up there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also the account of Mary and her friend who were taking a picture together, I guess, when the shots rang out.
Yeah.
And Mary's immediate reaction, she actually fell to the ground, and she believed that the shots that she was hearing were coming from the knoll, and that there might have been multiple shooters based on the sound and the timing of those reports.
And then there's this group of people who were by the stairs, ascending the knoll, and one of those people was Emmett Hudson. These people had their backs to the railroad yard, and the depository was to their left, but they all believed that the shots were coming from behind them.
Mm.
So again, kind of suggesting a source other than the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. So all of these accounts taken together really start to paint a picture that's inconsistent with a lone gunman firing from the 6th floor.
Right. Right. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and consider some of the questions that have been raised about Lee Harvey Oswald himself, and about the evidence that supposedly links him to the crime. So one of the first things that critics pointed out and that Lifton talks about is this discrepancy in the size of a paper bag that Oswald allegedly carried into the depository compared to the one that was actually found there.
Yeah.
Witnesses who saw him with that bag described it as being smaller than the one that's presented as evidence.
Right. And so this really gets to the question of how much do we trust the evidence that we're being shown?
Right.
Right. If something as basic as the size of the bag that Oswald was carrying doesn't match up, then what else might not be as it appears?
Yeah. Yeah, and perhaps even more significantly, there's evidence suggesting that the rifle that Oswald ordered, might not have been the same one that was found on the 6th floor, which opens up, this very real possibility that the rifle that was found there could have been planted.
Yeah, that's right. That's really the most damning possibility.
Yeah.
that the very gun that they're using to say Oswald did it might not have been his gun at all. And then of course Lifton reminds us that Oswald himself consistently denied shooting anyone. And so given all these doubts about the evidence, it's really not hard to imagine that that a good lawyer would have a pretty strong case to make on Oswald's behalf. Had he actually been given a chance to defend himself properly, if he hadn't been killed by Jack Ruby before he could ever go to trial. So the point here that Lifton's making is that the official narrative relies on potentially flawed evidence against Oswald.
Right. Okay, so this brings us to Lifton's interactions with Wesley Liebeler, who, was actually a Warren Commission attorney. So getting Liebeler's perspective as somebody who, who was involved in that work, is I think a really interesting counterpoint to what we've been talking about.
Yeah, it is. And I think what's interesting is that, Lifton decides to confront Liebeler directly about, these perceived flaws in the Warren Commission's work.
Right.
This happens after Liebeler is appointed to the faculty at UCLA Law School. So, Lifton's not just making criticisms in the abstract.
Right.
He's going directly to somebody who was involved in the work.
Right.
And trying to engage with him, on a personal level.
Right. And it seems like Liebeler, very strongly rejected the idea of this kind of deliberate orchestrated cover-up, where, everybody was in one room and told what to do.
Yeah.
He called that preposterous. And he really emphasized his own commitment to honesty and to basing, his conclusions on the evidence.
Right. And I think this highlights a kind of difference in perspective.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the critics, they see this deliberate conspiracy at work.
Right.
But Liebeler, he's saying, no. I mean, I was there. We were all very honest in our work. If there are problems here, it's not because we were trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes.
Right.
It's maybe because, there were flawed procedures or we misinterpreted the evidence or something like that.
Right.
But it wasn't, some big lie from the get-go.
Yeah. But even with that stance, it does seem like Liebeler had a reaction, to Sylvan Fox's book, The Unanswered Questions About the Kennedy Assassination, which, Lifton showed to Liebeler with bullet holes punched through the cover.
That's right. Yeah.
And the subsequent exchange, for copies of those sign letters, it seems like Liebeler is starting to become aware of, potential problems with the Warren Report's conclusions.
Yeah, I think that's right. And what really stands out to me is Liebeler's comment about the commission attorneys potentially trying to hang it on each other.
Yeah.
If the Warren Report fell apart.
Right.
So, this kind of hints at, I don't know, some kind of underlying tension,
right.
or maybe not complete confidence even within the commission's own legal team.
Right.
Right. So, maybe even those who worked on it are starting to see that maybe the official narrative is a little more fragile than they'd like to believe.
Right.
And that it could all come crumbling down.
Yeah. And it seems like over time, Liebeler's views sort of evolved. He later acknowledged that there was a need for an objective piece of work that presented both sides of the issue fairly, which is a significant shift from just simply defending the Warren Report.
Yeah. He's going further than that, and we see this in the research efforts that he undertakes at UCLA. I mean, he really takes on this monumental task of going through those 26 volumes, which he called a legal Frankenstein, because there's just so much material there, and it's not very well organized. And it really shows a real dedication, I think, on his part to going back and re-examining this, even though he was a part of, the original investigation.
Yeah. And the reaction, to his course at UCLA was kind of varied. Former commission attorneys were pretty skeptical, but the public seemed, more encouraging. They even sent in small donations. And we even see that the publishing industry kind of changed their attitude toward him after some initial publicity.
Yeah, I think that just kind of goes to show that this whole issue around the Kennedy assassination was and still is very controversial, and people have very strong opinions on both sides, and it's clear that Liebeler's attempt to kind of go back and revisit this evidence even years later was something that touched a nerve for a lot of people.
Right. Okay, so let's go back to the head snap for just a second, and consider some of the alternative explanations that Lifton explored. So one of the ideas was that there was sudden automobile acceleration.
Right. But Lifton points out that that can pretty much be ruled out based on the testimony of Secret Service agent Clint Hill, who said that the car didn't actually accelerate until more than 3 seconds after the fatal shot.
Right.
So that just doesn't match up with the head movement that we see.
Right.
Which is immediate.
Right. Another possibility that was raised was that there was some kind of neuromuscular reaction.
Yeah, and Lifton actually consulted with a neurosurgeon at the UCLA Brain Research Institute about this. And the neurosurgeon kind of emphasized that kind of explanation would be very speculative. it's true that if there's severe brain damage, you can get, a momentary kind of spasm. But President Kennedy's, body mostly just sagged after the shot, which is not what you'd expect to see if there was some kind of violent neuromuscular reaction. So the forces that were at play here are most likely related to the impact itself.
Okay.
And that's why, the head goes backward.
Okay, so let's get into this really crucial area of the autopsy and the sort of conflicting accounts, between the Dallas doctors and the official Warren Commission findings. I mean, this is where I think Lifton's investigation really sort of zeroes in.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
So, take the throat wound, for instance.
Right.
Dr. Perry at Parkland Hospital, he initially states that, it appears to be a wound of entry. Right. This is a medical professional who examined the wound very shortly after the shooting.
Right.
So, that's significant. And for Lifton, that's a really important piece of evidence.
Yeah.
It suggests that maybe there was a shot from the front.
Right, but then the Warren Commission concluded that that throat wound was actually an exit wound.
Mm.
So I mean that's a complete 180, from the initial medical assessment.
Yeah, it really is. And what's so interesting about that is that the Secret Service, they claimed that they couldn't find a tape or a transcript of that Parkland press conference where Dr. Perry made that initial statement. Hmm. So basically, that firsthand assessment of the wound just disappeared from the official record.
Right.
Nobody could verify it. Nobody could go back and listen to it. It was just gone.
Yeah.
And that's a very significant point, in Lifton's argument about potential, suppression of evidence.
Right.
If something as simple as a tape recording of a press conference,
can go missing, then what else might have happened?
Yeah. And as you point out, the Warren Commission only cites a single media report that kind of downplays what Dr. Perry said. They suggest that all he said was that it was possible that the throat wound was an entrance wound, but that seems like a very, very kind of selective use of the information.
It does. It's like they're cherry picking the information that fits their conclusion,
right,
and kind of ignoring anything that doesn't.
Yeah, and it does seem like the attitude of some of those Dallas doctors did sort of change over time. While some of them stood by their initial assessments when they were interviewed by the Warren Commission, others, including Dr. Perry, they became more, I guess, conciliatory, and press interviews about the throat wound, those completely ceased.
Right. So Lifton, he points out that this shift seemed to coincide with with the FBI leaks in December of '63, about Oswald being the lone assassin firing from behind. So it's almost like once that information got out there, some of these doctors, they started to maybe, I don't know, second guess themselves, or maybe, they were worried about the, the backlash if they contradicted the official narrative.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, who wants to stick their neck out,
right,
and go against, the FBI? I mean, they're a very powerful organization.
Yeah. And Arlen Specter's questioning, of those Dallas doctors when they were interviewed, it really raised eyebrows. Lifton describes it as this attempt to justify, a predetermined conclusion. Specter would use these really long hypothetical questions with added facts that seemed designed to kind of lead those doctors to agree that the throat wound was actually an exit wound.
Yeah, and Lifton gives a very, very specific example of this with the question that Specter asked Dr. Carrico. So, Specter asked Carrico to assume a scenario where President Kennedy is struck from the rear at a downward angle, and then the missile, passes through his body without hitting any bones, and then it, traverses the neck and exits at the location of the throat wound. And then Specter asked Carrico, well, is the appearance of the wound consistent with it being an exit wound? Right. So he's basically leading the witness to a specific answer by, presupposing these key elements of the Warren Commission's theory.
Right.
He's already decided, or the commission has already decided what happened.
Right.
And now he's just trying to get the witnesses to agree with him.
Right.
And so Lifton sees this as a very clear example of bias in the questioning that's aimed at supporting this specific conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to note that even the Warren Commission privately had some disquiet about the FBI's initial, skeletal, I think they called it, summary report on the assassination.
Right.
So this suggests that even they were aware that that maybe those initial FBI findings weren't completely robust.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, it seems like there's some real questions about the quality of that initial investigation.
Yeah, there's definitely some red flags there. Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to Bullet Exhibit 399, the so-called single bullet theory. So the Warren report proposes that this one bullet struck both President Kennedy and Governor Connolly.
Right.
And for a lot of people, it was the condition of Bullet Exhibit 399, that really made this theory so hard to accept.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty remarkable, right? So the Warren report itself barely even mentions this bullet.
Yeah.
And it doesn't include a photograph of it.
Mm-hmm.
But in those 26 volumes, there's this very detailed description of the bullet when it arrives at the FBI lab. And reportedly, it didn't have any blood or tissue on it. It was basically pristine. And this is something that several of the doctors at Parkland Hospital who saw the bullet, right away, commented on. They said, "Wow, this bullet's in perfect condition," and they objected to the single bullet theory right from the start. So this information was available to the Warren Commission.
Yeah.
But they chose not to really highlight it in their report.
Right. So it really seems like the single bullet theory just kind of relies on this, as you call it, this super bullet that somehow defies the laws of probability and physics. And then its mysterious appearance, at Parkland Hospital, only adds to the questions, I think.
Yeah, and Lifton makes a pretty convincing case that bullet 399, it just wasn't a super bullet.
Right.
And it likely didn't cause all of the wounds that Governor Connolly sustained. For him, the single bullet theory really exemplifies, this shift, from viewing the assassination as an unsolved crime, as something that we need to investigate, to one that involves political judgments about the commission, the government. It's like the evidence is there, and people are able to make these independent judgments about what happened.
Right. Okay, so let's turn our attention to the discrepancies in the autopsy report itself. So in particular, this early FBI report that mentions a low back wound with no transit versus the later Bethesda autopsy report, which suggests a transiting wound.
Yeah, and that discrepancy was one of the things that led to early theories that maybe the autopsy report had been changed. Epstein's book Inquest and Sylvia Meager's work, they both kind of touched on the timing of the different leaks regarding the autopsy findings.
Right.
They were pointing out these inconsistencies. So, it was something that people were aware of from fairly early on.
Yeah. And Lifton explains that the differing sources of autopsy information likely contributed to these variations, between the FBI and the Warren Commission. So both of them relied on the sniper's nest and the ammunition that was recovered there.
Yeah.
But their initial understanding of the details of the wounds seemed to differ significantly.
Right. And the time frame, for any potential change to the autopsy report, that's really crucial.
Yeah.
So, if any revisions were made, after January 13th, 1964, which was the date of the FBI supplemental report,
right,
then the Warren Commission themselves would be a much more direct suspect. It was around that time that this whole idea of the, Kennedy-Connolly time squeeze, based on the analysis of the Zapruder film, became apparent. And so, changing the bullet from a non-transiting one to a transiting one would help to resolve that issue, within the single bullet theory. Yeah. So, there's a real possibility that the Warren Commission themselves might have been involved in manipulating the evidence.
Okay, so Liebeler, despite his initial involvement, with the Warren Commission, he seemed to recognize the problems that were arising from these inconsistencies and the various charges and countercharges that were swirling around.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he really emphasized this need for an objective account, something that presented both sides, fairly. And he acknowledges, how difficult it is to research this stuff. He famously called those 26 volumes, he said it was like a legal Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Because it's just this huge mass of material, and it's not very well organized. So, even he is admitting that this is tough stuff to work with. But despite that, he goes to UCLA, he starts teaching this course on the Kennedy assassination.
Well,
And you